The international border between two countries defines where one country ends and another begins. This is something that should be incredibly simple but often isn't. International borders come in a variety of shapes and sizes. Some are simply an imaginary line in the middle of the street, while others are much more clearly defined, and some are even guarded 24/7. But before I begin, I need to quickly define a couple of terms: enclave and exclave. An enclave is a country or part of a country that is entirely surrounded by another country, while an exclave is part of a country that is geographically separated from the rest of the country. In this example, country A is an enclave of country B because it's totally surrounded by it. In this next example, Y is an exclave of country A. Exclaves aren't necessarily always enclaves too, either because they have more than one border or because they have a coastline. Or both. In this final example, X is both an enclave and an exclave. It's an enclave of country B and an exclave of country A. There's 3 countries in the world that are enclaved by another country, the first of which is the Vatican City, home of the Pope and the smallest country in the world, which is an enclave of Italy. And Italy apparently loves enclaves because it also has the country of San Marino enclaved within its borders. But if that's not enough to convince you Italy loves enclaves, then take a look at Campione d'Italia, an Italian exclave which is an enclave within Switzerland. This tiny municipality, home to 2,000 Italians, uses the Swiss franc as its currency and is exempt from EU VAT, a fact which is greatly taken advantage of in the form of Europe's largest casino. So, Italy is a country that has not one but 2 countries within its borders, and part of it is enclaved within another country. The final and by far largest enclaved country in the world is Lesotho, with a population of just over 2 million, is surrounded by South Africa. To put the size difference into perspective, here's a comparison between San Marino and Vatican City. And now here's Lesotho. Lesotho is 70,000 times the size of Vatican City. Now, a country within a country is all very well and good, but it's not exactly that complex. So let's take things up a notch. We've looked at enclaves, now let's look at enclaves within enclaves, also known as counter-enclaves or second-order enclaves. Now, I'm not talking about country A within country B within country C. While that would be an enclave within an enclave, there's no examples of that in the world. I'm talking about country A within country B within country A. Once again, there's 3 examples. The least complex of which is in the Middle East and the border between the United Arab Emirates and Oman. Here we can see a United Arab Emirates exclave, which is an enclave of an Omani exclave, which is itself an enclave of the United Arab Emirates. And this is the least complex of the 3 examples. Next we move over to Europe, where things start to get a bit ridiculous with the border between the Netherlands and Belgium and the interlocking municipalities of Baarle-Nassau and Baarle-Hertog, which is a little something like this. In total, there are 22 Belgian enclaves and 8 Dutch enclaves, 7 of which are counter-enclaves. But these aren't just imaginary lines. Every single inch of the border within the town is clearly marked, letting you know which country you're in. And the border passes through just about anything. It passes through streets, so next door neighbours may not be living in the same country. House numbers clearly indicate which country the residents are living in. It also passes through shops, where you might select your items in one country and pay for them in another. Restaurants and cafes, where different tables are in different countries. Car parks, making it possible to legally park in 2 countries at the same time, and even people's houses. Some residents of Baarle wake up in the Netherlands and make their breakfast in Belgium. But which country do these people live in if the border passes right through their house? Well, the answer is very simple. Wherever your front door is, that's what country you live in. Well, it's simple unless you live in this house, in which the border passes directly through the front door. This is the only house that's part of both countries. It has 2 doorbells, one for each country, and 2 house numbers because it has 2 addresses. Before 1995, the borders weren't marked and were left vague. This caused an unfortunate situation for a Belgian man living in Belgium. Or so he thought, but in 1995, when the border was accurately marked, it was revealed he was actually living in the Netherlands, not Belgium. Legally at this point, he would have to change his address over to the Netherlands, but unwilling to go through the bureaucratic nightmare of having to change which country he pays his taxes to and change which company provides his utilities, he decided against it. He decided instead to move his front door. Genius. Living in Baarle might sound like a bit of a nightmare, but it isn't really. Because both countries are part of the EU's Schengen area, borders are completely open, allowing free travel between the countries. And since 2002, both countries used the euro. And there's also no language barrier because Dutch is the official language of northern Belgium. But just when you thought things couldn't possibly get more complicated, wait until you see the enclave complex between India and Bangladesh. This single border alone comprises 80% of the world's enclaves, with 106 Indian enclaves within Bangladesh and 92 enclaves of Bangladesh within India. And of the combined 198 enclaves, 24 of them are second order enclaves. And this border also has the world's only third order enclave. That's right, an enclave within an enclave within an enclave. That is, part of India inside part of Bangladesh inside part of India which is inside Bangladesh. But as ridiculous as this is, unfortunately it's actually a very serious issue and completely different from the situation in Europe. India and Bangladesh don't have open borders, so for the 50,000 people living in the enclaves they're basically trapped. The governments don't provide anything for them, so they don't have access to basic life essentials such as running water, electricity or gas, and there's no schools or hospitals within the enclaves, and the emergency services won't cross any borders, so crime is extremely prevalent. In 2011, the governments of both countries agreed to sort out the enclaves by swapping land, but more than 2 years later and still nothing has changed. However, some small progress has been made. The Team Bia corridor, a narrow strip of Indian land separating the largest Bangladesh enclave from the mainland, has been leased to them by the Indian government, allowing residents to travel to the mainland. Although in saying that, this was first proposed back in 1974 and took nearly 40 years to come to an agreement. Moving away from enclaves now and onto the land that no one wants, which is in the African desert between Egypt and Sudan. Where exactly the border is, however, is debatable. If you ask Egypt, they'll tell you it's here, but if you ask Sudan, they'll tell you it's here. The overlapping border claims create two areas of land, and both countries claim the same land, the Halaib Triangle, leaving the adjacent land unclaimed by both countries. Neither country can claim the land known as Bir Tawil, as they would have to give up their claim to the much more desirable land. If we compare the two pieces of land, the Halaib Triangle is 10 times bigger, has access to the Red Sea and has several settlements and small villages, where Bir Tawil is landlocked and completely uninhabited. The origin of the dispute dates back to 1899, before Sudan was an independent country and was a condominium between the United Kingdom and Egypt known as Anglo-Egyptian Sudan. The border was set at the 22nd parallel. Then, 3 years later, the British drew a new line which they called the administrative boundary, which better reflected the usage of the land. This is because the Egyptian tribe that used the land south of the 22nd parallel and the people living in the Halaib Triangle were culturally more closely related to that of the Sudanese population. Therefore, in 1956, when Sudan became independent, they assumed the administrative boundary was the border, while Egypt assumed it was the 22nd parallel. The triangle is currently administered by Egypt, but most maps simply use a dotted line for the disputed border. Bir Tawil is the only unclaimed land outside of Antarctica. And speaking of Antarctica, this is another place for complex borders. That's right, even a continent with no government or permanent population has international borders. Well, kind of. There are more claims to land than actual borders. Parts of Antarctica are claimed by the United Kingdom, Norway, Australia, France, New Zealand, and this is where things get complicated, Chile and Argentina. The land to the southwest is unclaimed, so basically there's land that's claimed by 3 countries and land that's claimed by no countries at all. The reason no one has claimed it is because of the Antarctica Treaty. Article 4 of said treaty states that the treaty does not recognise, dispute, nor establish territorial sovereignty claims. No new claims shall be asserted while the treaty is in force. The treaty is signed by 50 countries, including all countries that have claims of land on the continent, although Russia and the United States have reserved the right to claim land. This means that any new claims made on the continent will be unrecognised, and basically that all current claimants have no official sovereignty over their claimed land. The final place to look at for complex borders is the island of Cyprus. Now you'd be forgiven for thinking Cyprus doesn't have any complex borders, or, any borders for that matter, but Cyprus is an absolute minefield of border complexities. The island is split roughly in half by the UN buffer zone, which separate the Republic of Cyprus from the unrecognised self-declared independent country of Northern Cyprus, and then there's the sovereign base areas under British control. But the complications don't end there. We're back to enclaves and exclaves again, with the Northern Cyprus exclave on the northwest coast of the island, and within the eastern sovereign base area of Dekelia there's 4 exclaves of Cyprus, 3 of which are enclaves, 2 of which are so close they're only separated by a British road. And if we take a closer look right here, we can see the same again, a British road through Cyprus. and this is the only part of the island not split by the UN buffer zone. The British Road basically acts as the de facto international border. But it's not actually an international border because Northern Cyprus is considered occupied territory of the Republic of Cyprus and is almost totally unrecognised as a country. Only one UN member recognises Northern Cyprus, Turkey. Which is unsurprising given that the official name of Northern Cyprus is the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. The cause of the border irregularities go back to before 1960 when the island of Cyprus was a British colony. Then, in 1960, when Cyprus gained independence, the United Kingdom kept the land around their RAF bases given their strategic locations just off the Middle East. Then, in 1974, Turkey invaded Cyprus and took about 40% of their land. Barriers were built in the middle of the island, which is now guarded by UN peacekeeping forces. Then, in 1983, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus was established, and not much has changed since then. Of course, this is by no means an exhaustive list. There's plenty more complex borders in the world, like the border between North and South Korea, which technically isn't a border because technically it's still at war, or the maritime border between the Diomede Islands, which also happens to be the international dateline. Therefore, despite only being 4 kilometers between the islands, there's a 23-hour time difference. But those are topics for another day. Thanks for watching.